And we begin with the 4 by-elections, 2 in Toronto, 1 in Vancouver, and 1 in northern Saskatchewan. All the ridings were held by the Liberals after the last election in 2006. All of the by-elections were caused by Liberal MPs' resignations. So going into last night, Liberal leader Stéphane Dion his party had 4 seats to defend. Well, when the votes were counted in all 4 ridings, Stéphane Dion said 3 out of 4 is not bad.
Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Joyeuse fête de la Saint-Patrick. You know, St. Patrick's Day, it's a green day, eh? I love it. But tonight, it's also a great day for Liberals.
And this is what Dion was talking about. In the Toronto riding of Willowdale, the Liberal candidate, Martha Hall Findlay, had almost 60% of the vote. The Conservatives had about half of that. And look at this. The Green Party collected 5.8% of the vote, a full percentage point more than the NDP. In Toronto Centre, again, Liberal Bob Rae had close to 60% of the vote. But look at the rest of the results. The NDP in second and the Green Party in third in a virtual tie, with over 13.5% of the vote and just 36 votes apart. And fourth, but not all that far behind, the Conservatives with just 12.5% of the vote. The Liberals also won in Vancouver Quadra, but what had been a safe Liberal seat turned into a cliffhanger. Winner Joan Murray received 36.1% of the vote, but Conservative Deborah Meredith was only 101 votes behind, with 35.5%. Up the track, the NDP with 14%, the Greens with 13.5%. And in terms of the Green vote, what would you make of that? Because I'm going to talk to Jack Layton in a little while, but boy, not a good night for the NDP when you see first they're not competitive even in Saskatchewan where they had been in the past. But in the big cities, they're way down, and the Greens are right with them.
Most interesting vote of the night, and it tells us that what happens in 2000, it happened in 2006 when Elizabeth May placed second, a surprising second in London North Centre, was the beginning of a trend. They were very close to second place in Toronto. What I've written for tomorrow anyway is saying you can't escape the conclusion that the Greens are up in 4 ridings, and the NDP is down in 3. And that maybe those votes aren't strictly interchangeable. I think the math is more complex than that, but definitely the Greens are doing something right and the NDP is doing something wrong.
Susan Delacourt, always interesting. Thanks for this. Well, there wasn't much for New Democrats to cheer about in last night's results. In fact, there were some ominous signals. In all of the 3 urban ridings, the NDP and the Greens were neck and neck. Look at this. In Vancouver Quadra, the New Democrat finished 272 votes ahead of the Green candidate, just 0.9 of a percentage point. In Toronto Centre, it was even closer. The New Democrat just 36 votes and 0.2 of a percentage point ahead. And in Willowdale, the worst news of all for the NDP, there the Green candidate was on top by 244 votes and a full percentage point of the vote. So, are there lessons learned for the New Democrats in the by-election entrails? NDP leader Jack Layton joins us now. There you see him. He joins us from Washington. Mr. Layton, not a good night for the NDP last night. The Greens neck and neck with you and even beating you in one riding in Toronto. Now, granted, your vote went up 2%, just so we have it on the record, in the riding in northern Saskatchewan. But in urban Canada, not a good night for you.
Well, actually, our vote went up in 2 of the ridings and went down in 2 others. Of course, in those ridings, we were up against former Liberal leadership candidates who were predicted to win pretty easily. So we're very comfortable with the campaigns that we ran, and we had strong candidates raising the issues that are really important. I think the big question right now is, are those Liberals who were elected, and there's only 3 of them out of the 4 ridings, they certainly lost another seat, but are they going to be permitted by their leader, Mr. Dion, to actually stand up in the House of Commons and stand up to Mr. Harper, or are they going to be told to sit in their places and not vote, which is what we've been seeing these last number of months from the Liberals?
Well, you're putting a good face on it, but you have to be concerned that the Greens are neck and neck with you in 3 urban ridings, 2 in Toronto, 1 in Vancouver, and that in one of those ridings are actually ahead. But basically, say you tied with them in every riding, just for the sake of argument. That's not where the NDP wants to be, and that's not where they were, where you were before. The Greens have come up.
Well, of course, we came second in Toronto Centre, and we're pleased about that. So clearly, we're the best choice to replace Bob Rae if people are looking for a change in direction. It's true that the Conservatives lost a considerable portion of their vote there in Toronto Centre, and some of it went to the Greens. Don't ask me why, but that did appear to happen, and I guess they're the ones who are going to have to ask questions about that.
Well, I like the silver lining for the cloud approach, but to best Mr. Rae, you'd have to get about 47% more of the vote, and I don't know that coming second with 13.8% of the vote is really much to cheer about.
Well, why don't you put those Outremont numbers up there that your folks no doubt could produce for you, and show the 2006 results, and then show the by-election just a little while ago, where we went from the teens up to 49.5%, I think it was, Don. So, I always use the phrase, don't let anybody tell you what can't be done, because we like proving them wrong.
Well, following that argument, I could put the 1988 election numbers up and show the NDP with over 40 seats. But that was then, this is now, and even Outremont was then, this is now. And the Greens were not a serious threat in the way that they seem to have become when you look at the public opinion polls. And now you see, I mean, they've been close to you in the public opinion polls, and now they're close to you in an election.
Well, all I know is that our caucus continues to grow in this whole round of by-elections that's happened since the last general election. We've got one more seat, and not only that, he's a very strong environmentalist, Thomas Mulcair. So I'm feeling very good about the direction that our party's going in the House, and we're the only party really standing up to Mr. Harper. So when a general election comes, Canadians are going to know that, because we stood up to him on the war, on the environment, on the big corporate tax cuts, and meanwhile, the Liberals have rolled over and basically let Mr. Harper do what he wants to do. And we'll take that message to the voters, and of course, they'll ultimately pass judgment on it. But we feel that people are looking for those who have principles and stand on those principles, and don't just think about their own political fortunes, but think about what they believe in. And certainly that's what the average working family is looking for. And the same kind of thing is being talked about here in Washington by progressives who are really creating some excitement and doing some things that people said might not be possible even just a few months ago.
But all of the things you said people will know in a general election, surely they know now. I mean, you've been telling them, and I don't see why you would get the kind of results you did last night if you think those issues are so important. The other point, I guess, is really, and I would think people in your party would really want to hear what you have to say on this. Are there no lessons learned for the NDP in last night's results? To get to the kind of results you didn't crack 20% anywhere. You know there is going to be a general election before too long, and I would assume that lessons learned would be a good way to approach these results, Jack Layton, rather than pretend that they look pretty good.
Well, when you go up in 2 ridings and down in 2, there's always something to be learned, and we'll naturally take the results back and study them. But as we look at what's been happening to our party since the last general election, what I think is now clear to Canadians is that we're a viable opponent for Stephen Harper, that we're taking on the issues, that we're challenging, for example, this whole question of trade deals and NAFTA, and we're taking it onto the international stage. We're challenging the government on the extension of the war. There's an awful lot of Canadians who don't agree, millions of Canadians who don't agree with the Liberal-Conservative alliance to extend the war for 2 more years. And,
so my understanding is then none of those millions live in the 4 ridings that were in play last night. Because the highest you got was in Saskatchewan, was 17% of the vote. And that's just in the window where you were a little higher in 2006, and you were a little lower in 2004. So you're just in your window, but in these big Toronto urban ridings, one of them right next to your riding, you're down at, where are you in Toronto Centre? 13.8% of the vote. So
Well, I know that Mr. Dion will come back with one less member of Parliament to the House of Commons, and we won't. And we'll be there with our strong team, which has grown by a by-election victory in Outremont, something they said couldn't happen. And we'll take that team forward into the next election when it comes. And what we're going to do is say that it's time for both of these old-line parties to start to address the issues of working families, because they're being left behind. They're being squeezed increasingly. Right. And I think you're going to see that issue play out in the next election, and we certainly intend to bring it forward, because we don't think that what's happening right now is fair to people. That's for sure.
Jack Layton, I'm out of time, but thanks for coming on the program. Appreciate it very much.
All right. Thank you, Don.